Hi, everyone. Welcome. I have just a couple of announcements up as people are coming in. Number one, if you're a KDM5C family, you can enter to win a door prize today, which is an AAC package that we're giving away. Includes an iPad mini and some Apple Store credit and some consult time with Caitlin, our expert who's here today. And so if you will go to that link, I've also pasted it in the chat, and I'll do that a couple more times as everybody is coming in. And you can enter to win once per child that you have with a need of an AAC device. And then for those of you who are KDM5C families on the call that haven't marked your calendars yet, we have a RareX data collection program launch coming up on February 25th. That is a huge event for our community, and we would love to have everyone attend so that we can tell you about this new program and about the benefits of it for KDM5C research. I know as new people come in, they don't have that link in the chat, so sorry for spamming you. I'm just going to keep putting that into the chat. And then if you guys want to keep your chat box open, that's where we'll take any questions during the session today. There will be some specific times that we kind of pause and bring those questions up. So welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. We have some researchers, we have some clinicians in here as well. This is amazing. We've got some future therapists. We've got parents, grandparents. I love it. With that, I am going to stop sharing so that I can pass it over here in just a minute to our presenter today. I'm going to introduce her first. So we have Caitlin Burke on the call with us today. She's a speech language pathologist who specializes in AAC for individuals with complex communication needs. I've been in a training with Caitlin before where she came to Julian's school and met with his full team. So I know that you guys are in for a treat today. I'll briefly read her little bio. Caitlin got her master's from UNC Chapel Hill and has a passion for supporting complex communicators in learning to read and write so that they may have access to autonomous communication, educational opportunities, and self-advocacy. She's been practicing for more than 8 years in both public and private practice settings, and recently founded her own practice called the Little Speech Tree in Durham, North Carolina, where she supports families on their AAC journey. And then one of the big reasons why we chose Caitlin for this session is that she views AAC and communication through a neurodiversity-affirming lens, which is similar to KARES' mission to improve lives. And we share the belief that neurodiverse people are not broken versions of normal, but bring their own strength and value to the world. So today she is going to talk us through what AAC is and best practices for supporting our complex communicators. So Caitlin, I will pass it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Let me get the screen all set up. Let's see. Okay. All right, are we seeing the correct screen? Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. And yes, today we are going to dive into the world of AAC. And specifically, we're going to focus on how we can support our AAC users. Ultimately, our goal is for our children to be their authentic self, to make meaningful connections with others, and make decisions about their own lives. And really, to reach this goal, we really need to focus on connection. In terms of disclosures, I am receiving a fee for today's presentation. Okay, so before we get started, I do consider myself to be a neurodiversity-affirming speech-language pathologist. This means that I believe that neurodivergent people are not broken versions of normal, but rather bring their own unique strengths to the world. I work with neurodivergent children to help them overcome barriers that they may experience so that they can live a happy and fulfilling life. I also listen to neurodivergent voices because they are the real experts, and I use terminology that's preferred by the majority of their community. And we're going to get into that terminology in a minute, but I want you to know that this journey for me of becoming a neurodiversity affirming speech language pathologist was not easy. It took a lot of unlearning and reflection on the mistakes that I've made in the past. But when you know better, you do better. Okay, so to review some terminology, neurodiversity refers to the naturally occurring differences and variations in brain functioning. And so we know that no two brains are alike. Neurodivergence is a term that was developed to reflect the experience of those individuals whose neurodiversity falls outside of what society would consider to be typical or normal. And so neurodivergence can include individuals with learning disabilities, ADHD, autism, intellectual disabilities, mental health disabilities, and more. So neurodiversity affirming is really a mindset in which the therapist, the teacher, the parent, whoever it is, recognizes that neurodivergence is not a flaw to be fixed, but also acknowledges that neurodivergence can be disabling in our current world. So neurodiversity affirming therapists, we don't just focus on helping the child gain skills. We are also working to educate those in the child's life on how to best support them. And we try our best to incorporate each child's unique learning style and their special interests into learning opportunities. So let's talk about this term non-speaking versus the term nonverbal. So this was one that I more recently learned about. So non-speaking is the preferred term by the neurodivergent and disabled communities. And this is used to describe individuals who use other communication modalities besides speech. So these are people that are not able to use speech, spoken language, to communicate. And this term is preferred to the term nonverbal because nonverbal has the connotation of not using or understanding language. And we know that language is so closely tied to cognition. It's our thoughts, right? And language can be expressed using other means besides speech. It can be expressed with writing, with sign language. There are other ways to express language besides speech. So we really try to use this term non-speaking to capture that. You might also hear other terms like minimally speaking or unreliably speaking. And minimally speaking means that you might have a person who has access, they can say some spoken words, but it's not enough to fully communicate all of the thoughts that they're having. And an unreliable speaker would be someone that has access to speech during maybe certain points of the day or during certain contexts, but then that speech is not accessible during other situations. So for example, if they're in a really heightened emotional state, maybe they're dysregulated, very frustrated or anxious, or even a positive emotional state, like very, very excited. During those points in time, they might not be able to access their speech. And autistic adults have described this sort of situation as the words kind of getting stuck, or even unintended words coming out when they didn't mean to say that word. And then definitely at a later time, check out this link. It's Autistic Tom. He's an adult autistic man, and he describes the term non-speaking in his own words. It's nice to hear it from him. Okay, so there are two models of disability. There is the medical model and the social model. And really the difference in these two models is where the responsibility is placed. Are we going to place all the responsibility on the disabled person, or are we going to place a lot of the responsibility on society? And so the medical model implies that a person is disabled because of their impairment or their differences, and that impairment or difference should be fixed. So the medical model is focusing on what's wrong with the person rather than on what the person might really need. And the social model implies that the person is disabled because of the way society is organized. And it focuses on removing barriers and creating more inclusive spaces. Okay, so here's an overview of what we're going to touch on today. We're going to start by reviewing AAC. Then we're going to move into shifting our mindset when we think about AAC. And finally, getting into what is our role? What can we do to support AAC users? Okay, what is AAC? So AAC is the acronym for Augmentative and Alternative Communication. And we're going to start with the alternative part because this is typically what people think of when they think of AAC. They think of something that is replacing spoken language because you have a non-speaking person that needs some alternative mode to communicate. But there is also augmentative, the augmentative part of this acronym. And that means that this AAC system is supplementing spoken language. So this could be the case for our minimally speaking or unreliably speaking individuals, right? So that they have AAC to fill in the gaps of words that they don't have, or to fill in the gaps during moments of, dysregulation when they're not able to access their speech. Okay, so one other thing I want to touch on before we move to the next slide is that AAC is not synonymous with speech generating device or iPad communication app. AAC, it's more of this all-encompassing thing that includes all forms of communication besides speech. And so we're going to take a look at what AAC could be. This is probably what you're thinking of when you hear AAC, things like photos and picture symbols or object symbols if you have someone with a visual impairment, communication boards like core vocabulary boards, communication books like maybe a pod, or what a lot of people tend to think of, speech generating device, right? Some sort of hardware like an iPad or an Android, or from a specific company, their durable medical equipment with language software on it. So really what we're looking at with these forms of AAC is an external tool. It is something that is outside of the person's body, and we are giving them this tool to help them communicate. But really, AAC also includes all of these things. And these types of communication are on our body. And so it is really important to still include these types of AAC modalities in any person's communication toolbox because they are always accessible. They always have their body. And so it's things like vocalizations. Maybe your child has a certain vocalization that they do when they're happy, or another vocalization that they make when they are clearly upset. We can use eye gaze to look towards something that we're referencing. Gestures is such a powerful communication tool, right? Thumbs up, waving, shrugging. Of course, there's sign language. We all use facial expressions. That definitely gives us clues as to how our children are feeling. And body movements. We could be doing a yes nod, a no head shake. And so I always, with all of my AAC users, include some of these forms of communication because they just enrich the message. And they're always available. And so I also wanted to touch on, there's definitely going to be situations where having something like a speech generating device or a communication book might not be a great idea. Like if you're at the pool or you're at the beach or you're on the lake or you're taking a bath, sometimes those situations, it's you're going to rely on these other more universal communication modalities, and that's okay. Everybody uses AAC. So I'm considered a neurotypical person, and I use AAC to supplement my spoken language. I am using facial expressions right now. I am using hand gestures. I am using eye gaze when I'm looking at different things. And then now with technology, we all use things like emojis and GIFs. So we're using more symbolic ways to communicate. So AAC is something that everyone uses. Okay, so we are going to, I think, pause here and just check in and see if there are any questions about the content up until this point. Okay, I am going to continue on, but if you have any questions, just feel free to put them in the chat. Okay. Okay, so shifting our mindset about AAC. We want to view AAC within a multimodal communication framework. This means that we support and encourage all forms or modalities of communication. So remember, that is these modalities and these modalities. We want to support all forms of communication. Why? Why does that matter? Why should we advocate for multimodal communication? Well, first of all, everyone, including all of us, use multimodal communication. So why would we limit our children with complex communication needs to just one modality, right? What if someone told you that you could only use speech, you can't use vocalizations, body language, facial expressions, gestures? That would be very strange. So we need to, allow our complex communicators the same right. We also use the most efficient and effective mode of communication based on the situation. So I like to give the example of maybe the complex communicator, the AAC user, is walking down the hallway and their friend is going to be passing them in the hallway. They're probably going to choose the quickest way to say hello, which for them might be a wave and a smile, versus stopping, pulling out their speech generating device, navigating to the hi, how are you button, because at that point, their friend may have already passed them and that social opportunity is now gone. So sometimes the time and effort that it takes to formulate a message on a speech generating device is just not worth it, because that moment and that opportunity for social connectedness has already passed. And the last reason, well, there's probably more reasons, but the last one we'll talk about is that different modes of communication might be more accessible in different situations. So remember when we talked about those heightened emotional states or dysregulation, those moments are likely going to be times when the child relies on more of their automatic mode of communication, which can look like behavior, right? Body language, vocalization, or maybe it's just the AAC modality that they were first introduced to. And that's okay, because during that heightened emotional state, that's all their little brains can handle. It's really hard to, in those moments, pull out a brand new system that they're learning and try to find a message to communicate how they're feeling. that sort of teaching we would want to happen outside of those moments of dysregulation. Okay, so in your slides that either have been or will be shared with you, you can click on this image to make a copy, and it's a resource from Practical AAC. It's a really nice blog with a lot of really practical resources. And it's a really nice form that you can use to record all the different ways that your child communicates, especially those communication modalities that are maybe more subtle or unique to your child that maybe you and a few other people know what they mean, but not a lot of other people can interpret that. It's a good place to record those type of communication modalities, and then you can share it with others like your child's teacher or other therapists. Because what I like about this is that it places responsibility on those other communication partners, right? Where we're saying, hey, my child has some ways that they communicate that you have to learn what they mean. And so it's really incorporating that social model of disability. Okay, so everyone has the right to what we call autonomous communication. And this wonderful quote is by Gail Porter. She's the speech language pathologist who developed the POD, which is a language system. And she says that that autonomous communication is being able to say whatever I want to say to whoever I want to say it to, whenever I want to say it. And what I like to point out is that sometimes that can mean that the person doesn't want to talk to you, that they don't want to say anything to you, and that's their right. We can't force someone to say something. And the other thing is autonomous communication is not synonymous with independent communication. So it's likely the case that our complex communicators will need support and accommodations, and that's okay. Even neurotypical people, when we are conversing with each other, there are times when someone loses their train of thought or can't think of that word that's on the tip of their tongue, and their listener, the communication partner, typically will jump in and either remind them what they were talking about or help them come up with that word that's on the tip of their tongue. So communication is always interdependent. And so it's really important to focus more on autonomous communication as opposed to independent communication. And here's another link. If you click on this image, it will take you to ASHA's website. It's the American Speech Language Hearing Association. And this is the Communication Bill of Rights. It's a fundamental human right to be able to interact and communicate with others regarding our own lives. And this is a really nice resource that really lists out more specific rights that can be used to advocate for your child. So definitely check that out. Okay. AAC is for anyone who is unable to fully express their wants, needs, and ideas using speech or spoken language, regardless of their age. Someone's never too young, they're never too old, or their diagnosis. Someone is never too anything to qualify or be a candidate for AAC. So remember, this includes our non-speaking individuals, it includes our minimally speaking individuals, or even those unreliably speaking individuals. All right, we're going to go through some myths. So these are things that come up a lot in the AAC world. We'll hear things like, well, if my child uses AAC, then they won't be motivated to talk with their mouth. But in reality, AAC does not prevent a child from developing spoken language. spoken language or speech is the most efficient way to communicate. So if a child can speak with their mouth, then they will. And research actually shows that having access to AAC will support a child's spoken language development. So it can do no harm, it can only help. And again, this goes for children who have some spoken language. Having access to AAC is not going to make them want to talk less than they already are. Okay, another thing we hear is, once my child has a speech generating device, they will immediately be able to communicate all their thoughts and repair communication breakdowns. So it's kind of this view of the AAC tool is sort of the fixer-upper. This is going to be the thing that once we give this to the child, everything is all good. When really learning to use a robust language system on a speech generating device is like learning a new language. It takes time and effort to learn the location of all the messages. And this is why we want to always allow for multimodal communication. And another thing is, I'm going to keep reiterating this throughout, we also don't want to just pull out the speech generating device when a child is upset or dysregulated and expect them to tell us what's wrong in that moment. Successful communication with a speech generating device comes from the communication partners. So that is everybody around the child, and not from the device itself. The device is just a tool, but it's not the instructor. Another thing that we hear is children have to be ready for robust AAC systems. And when I say robust AAC systems, I'm talking about whether it is a communication book like a pod or a communication app that has, a lot of vocabulary in it. That's what robust means. So children don't need to prove that they're ready or worthy to use robust AAC systems. There's no prerequisites needed. Nobody is to anything. Just like we don't require babies to prove that they're ready to develop spoken language, we don't require minimally, unreliably, or non-speaking individuals to prove they're ready for robust AAC systems. We just give it to them and we go from there. But just to kind of give you some background on what prerequisites there were, because there were prerequisites that we used to use in the field to determine if a child was ready. So we don't do that anymore, but this is what some of them were. We would want to know that the child could understand cause and effect relationships, when really AAC is an amazing way to help children develop and an understanding of cause and effect through meaningful activities. So if an example could be if you're singing a song and then you pause and you activate more on the system and then you start singing again. As you do that over and over across time and across context, your child is going to learn, oh, the song stops, I hear the word more, and then the song starts again. So they learn that cause effect. It used to be that we would require an understanding that symbols, picture symbols, represent objects and actions and ideas, when really we can teach children what symbols mean after we've already given them the robust AAC system during meaningful activities. So symbol learning doesn't have to be a separate activity that a child has to master before they can have an AAC system. So I have 3 picture symbols here, and I purposefully left off the printed label because that is what us literate adults look at when we are looking at AAC systems and figuring out where things are. But this is really what it would be like for a pre-literate individual, looking at some of these symbols, right? So imagine if you had to learn these symbols before you were given access to robust AAC systems. So this symbol on the left, this is a min-speak symbol. So you would see this in a system like LAMP Words for Life or Unity. And this symbol means do. Because how do you represent the word do? So that's how they represent it. And this one in the middle, this is a symbol sticks symbol. And you would see this symbol in a system like Proloquo to go. And this also means do. And then over here on the right, you have a PCS board maker symbol, which you would find in a Tobii Dynavox system. And it also means do. So what's important to know is that symbols are very abstract, and we just are going to learn them on a device as we use them naturally. It used to be that we required the child to demonstrate certain motor skills before given access to AAC, robust AAC, when really motor skills can be developed while using AAC. We can work on finger isolation while playing with finger puppets, activating buttons on musical toys, and activating messages on a speech generating device. And there are supports out there, accessories out there like key guards and touch guides, other things like that, that can help guide a child's finger to targeted icons and reduce accidental activation. So motor skills shouldn't be a reason why we are holding back. All right, this one. Demonstrate a minimum level of language understanding or receptive language and cognitive ability. So it used to be that they would say, well, that child's just too low for a robust AAC system. But the thing to really know when it comes to children with complex communication needs, especially those with motor impairments, and this can include motor planning challenges, it's extremely difficult to accurately determine what their receptive language is, what their cognitive ability is, because a lot of those type of tasks that we use to assess those skills often require a motor act to do something like pointing to a picture or following directions by manipulating objects. So we don't need a child to demonstrate an understanding of a concept before we put it on their system. So the sort of theme of all of these is that the child can learn all of these things as we go. And really what we want to do is presume potential in every child. This is the least dangerous route. So you can kind of have two options. You can have a child that goes years and years without a means of communicating, with a robust system because everybody thought they weren't ready for it. Or you might have a child whose team has to problem solve along the way to kind of tweak a robust system that might not be the best fit, and you're having to make tweaks along the way, but the child still has access to a system. So this is just to show like that second option is always better than the first. And another thing is that assume poor performance is a result of poor instruction. So if a child seems to be struggling to learn to use a robust AAC system, rather than just going right for, well, what's up with the child? What aren't they doing? Let's first, or even saying, well, what's wrong with the AAC system and wanting to change it too quickly? Let's first look at ourselves and all the other communication partners around that child and put the responsibility on us and see what we might be doing or what we might need to change. Okay, so before we move to the next or the final section, I do want to go over the power imbalance that is present during every interaction between a speaking person and an AAC user. So in this example, we have the speaking person tends to dominate the conversation. I do this too. We determine the topic and we ask a lot of questions. So where does that put the AAC user? That puts them with having to talk about what the speaking person wants to talk about. So how can we level this scale? As the speaking person, we're going to put the responsibility on us. And what we're going to do is we're going to wait for that AAC user to initiate topics. Or we might invite them to decide what they want to talk about. We might say things like, I wonder what you want to talk about, and then wait. So ultimately, we want to reduce the questions. It's really hard for adults. We just ask kids a lot of questions, but it's something we have to be mindful of. We can make more comments or I wonder statements. I wonder what you think about that. So it's an invitation, but it's not a demand. Okay. Another power imbalance. So the speaking person often determines which mode of communication is best and forces the AAC user to use that mode. So you'll hear things like, tell me with your talker, say, I want a cookie with your talker. You can have a cookie when you ask for it with your talker. And that puts the AAC user over here thinking, well, maybe I prefer to use a different mode of communication than the one that you're offering me because I'm a little bit dysregulated emotionally or my sensory system is a little off right now. And so in this situation, as the speaking person, we're going to put the responsibility back on us and think, well, why? Why is it so important to us that the child use this one mode of communication above all others? Why? Why does that matter? We have to remember that many of our AAC users are carrying multiple loads. They aren't just struggling with communication. Likely they have sensory differences and motor planning challenges, and all of these other loads can be impacted to different degrees throughout the day, depending on the circumstance. So it might be that one mode of communication, like using their talker, might be a great option for that AAC user at one point in time during the day, but then at another point in time during the day, it's just not the most effective or efficient, and that AAC user would prefer to use a different mode of communication. And so again, with putting the responsibility on the speaking person, how can we level this scale? We can follow the child's lead on which mode of communication they prefer. So if you understand their message the first time they communicate it, like let's say they sign more, and you know that this sign means more, then you just go with it. You're not going to ask them to repeat themselves by saying, well, now say more on your talker, because that's really just sending the message that what that AAC user just communicated and the way they did is not valued. But there are cases when an AAC user might be using a mode of communication and you really don't know what they're trying to communicate. And so in that situation, what you could do is say something like, I really don't know what you're saying. Can you say it with your talker or show me or something else, and give them a few options of how they could potentially clarify their message? Okay. Another power imbalance, when you have the speaking person not offering enough wait time before they just jump in and prompt the AAC user on what to say. We're not very comfortable sitting in silence. It's really hard. It takes me, I'm still working on it. But what that does for the AAC user is it's telling them, or they're feeling like, if I was just given a little bit more time, I could have formulated a message on my own. And if we are not giving enough wait time and we are jumping into prompt so much over a period of time, eventually that AAC user is going to become prompt dependent. They are going to just get in the mindset of, well, they're going to tell me what they want me to say anyway, so I might as well wait for them to tell me what it is they want me to say. And how can we level this scale, right? Putting the responsibility on us, the speaking person. We just have to get comfortable with sitting in the silence. And I'll challenge people, just challenge yourself and see how long you can sit in silence, and see when you start to become uncomfortable, and just start to stretch that time. Okay. Another power imbalance. So the speaking person doesn't confirm the meaning of the message or makes assumptions about the meaning of the message. I am guilty of this. What this is saying or doing for the AAC user is that their messages are often misinterpreted, and then they are not given enough support to then expand upon or clarify their message. So an example of all of this, let's say your child uses their speech generating device and activates go. Okay, my assumption, I know I would do this, would go to a place of, oh, they want to go somewhere. So here I am already making an assumption about the meaning of the message, that it means they want to go somewhere. But how do I know that? How do I know that they're not asking where someone just went or is going? I don't know based on one word what their message means. And so how can we level this scale? What we can do is actually help the child clarify or co-construct a message with them. So in that example, what we could do is something like this. You said go. I wonder if you want to go somewhere, and maybe you point to the places folder, or I wonder if you were thinking about where someone went or is going, and point to the people folder. Or I wonder if it's something else, and maybe raise your hand so that if it's something else, the child can touch your hand to say, yeah, it was not either of those things that you guessed. We need to keep working on this. That something else option is so powerful because it helps that AAC user understand that we are not trying to make assumptions. We are truly trying to get to the bottom of what they want to say. Okay, this is the last one. So the speaking person focuses so much on the technology and the strategies above all else, above building an authentic relationship with the child by sharing in their interests. People and, well, kids want to just be kids and have fun, and people want to do things that bring them joy. So that's kind of over here what the AAC user is feeling. And really good therapy or good instruction should be fun. It should be motivating. It should be child-led. And so we need to just really, really focus on building rapport and taking interest in that unique little AAC user. Okay, so that's the end of section 2. And before we move into the last section, I just want to make sure there's no questions.
We do have quite a few questions in chat. So
Okay.
we're warming up. This is great. I'll just read them out to you if that's okay.
Yeah.
So the first one is, I think back from the myth section, this actually came from me. So
Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations for when, friends and family want to be kind of like the armchair quarterbacks in your parenting and say, oh, if you let them use ASL or if you let them have the iPad all the time, they're never going to try to speak. They're never going to learn to speak. Like, do you have a good one-liner, I guess, to diffuse those kind of like conversations? Or
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that I would say is kind of like, well, speech is the if a child can use speech, they will, because that's how they could get their message out the quickest and most efficient. So if they're not, it's not because they don't want to or they're not trying to, it's because they cannot.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the second question is, what are the pros and cons of choosing either a dedicated speech device, durable medical equipment, which I think is what most of our like insurance
Yep.
covered kind of devices would be, as opposed to an iPad with software?
Yes. So this is a great question. There are pros and cons to both. We'll just talk about the durable medical equipment route first. So some pros to that are that you're getting it pretty much for free. It's going to have a warranty and a lot of tech support that comes with that. Some of the cons, which could be pros for going the iPad route, is that funding takes a long time. Sometimes like it's taken up to 6 months, maybe even longer in some cases, but it can take a long time to just get that system to your child. And I'm trying to think. So with a lot of times, if a child is pretty savvy motorically, and the family wants something right away, the iPad route with an app is a really nice option, because you can even still get, you know, things to support like a key guard through third-party vendors, or a case and a strap. So it really, I think, comes down to like cost and timing of getting it in your child's hands, and also the tech support. Sometimes with the iPad and apps, there's less tech support, but you can always find support on Facebook groups with other users.
Okay, thank you. So the next one is about IEP goals. Do you have any suggestions for speech or communication related IEP goals, rather than uses 2-word phrases or 3-word phrases to answer questions?
Yes. Oh my goodness. So, because I did work in the school system, so I have experience in this area. I kind of have, and maybe I'll email it to you, a little like goal skeleton or outline. I really like my goals to be somewhat open-ended and broad, because communication is so vast. And so sometimes the way I'll kind of word a goal is, given unrestricted access to appropriate supports, child will use multimodal communication, because again, we're like writing this goal to include things that are neurodiversity affirming, right? And making sure the school team is not only giving access to the talker, but that they're allowing the child to have access to multimodal communication. And then it might be something like to express at least a certain number of communicative functions, which we're going to get into in the next section. But that would kind of be like the overall goal. And then you could have your smaller objectives that maybe break that down a little bit more, and always have a self-advocacy goal, meaning like a goal where the child can work on protesting appropriately. I think that's important too.
Okay. Oh, I love that so much, because I feel like the school always be like refusal behavior, and it's like
Yeah.
that's actually a good skill if you think about it. So
Yes,
learning how to
kids
say no.
kids need to be able to protest and have a variety of self-advocacy phrases. Like, it's really funny when I work with my kids, I get so happy when they kind of talk back to me, because I'm like, well, that is so typical. This is what they need to do.
All right, we've got 2 more questions.
Okay.
So this one is, I understand everything my son says, or like as parents, we understand everything our children communicate, but how do we get them to understand that not everyone is gonna understand their form of communication.
So is it like their form of communication is speech, but it's unintelligible, like it's hard to understand, or is it like they're using sign language and not everyone understands sign language?
I think it's probably a mix of both. This
Okay.
question came from Ron. So
Okay.
Ron, if you want to give us any more clarification.
I'm trying. Oh, I got it. Yeah, that's actually speech, because he don't really use he uses his device more at school, and I'm trying to do more because I know everything about him. I know what he's thinking before he even says it, and the problem is everybody else does. And it seems like a lot of times he doesn't really understand. He's communicate with me different than other people, and so I do have a difficult time with that because
Yeah.
he's with me most of the time. So he'll communicate with me like like he normally does, but he'll try to communicate with everybody else the same way, and he doesn't really understand that they don't understand him. That he needs to maybe switch to his device.
Yeah. So I mean that's a common theme. As a parent, you know your child so well, and you know some of the, even if he's speaking using spoken language and it's not super understandable to other people, you know what he's saying. And so I would encourage you to keep responding to him, and when he's with you, he can use speech, and that's how he communicates with you. What probably needs to happen is at school, maybe needs to be just like a sort of plan of how they go about responding in those situations, and it maybe needs to be consistent. Like, for example, he says something, and then the teacher, the therapist says, "I'm really sorry, I can't understand, or I don't know what you said, and I really want to know, can you," and then giving the few options, right? Maybe you want to tell me with your talk, or maybe you want to show me, or maybe you want to draw it, like kind of giving him some options. And it might be frustrating to him at first because he's going to have to like make the connection that maybe in school or in the community, that's probably going to be the case. And it might just take time and people responding in that way consistently.
Thank you. And then last question on this little break. Once a child learns a specific system, and this child is using Unity 84 sequenced, should we stick with that system their whole life? Would there be any reason to change?
I would have a few questions. So I would want to know, how long have they been on that system? How is it going? If they've been on it for a long time and it's going great, like there's no need to change. Unity is a great option for a lot of individuals.
That was my question.
Oh,
I was kind of wondering because we have Unity 84 through PRC.
Yep.
And my son uses an Accent 800, and
Yep.
we're just coming up on his 5-year mark of having this device, and he does really well with it. I mean, he's had it for 5 years and he does awesome with it, but I've just been really kind of torn between like keeping the actual dedicated speech device as opposed to going to something like an iPad. I mean, I was talking with Melissa about it's so handy for them that she can whip out her phone and have the app on there and have like multiple iPads all over, that the app is always available. Whereas the downfall for us with Porter's device, it breaks every once in a while. He's rough with it, it cracks, and there can be days where we don't have it.
Yep. Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll tell you that Unity doesn't have an app to go on an iPad or an Android. The closest thing that you would find to Unity 84 would be Lamp Words for Life. And it sounds like your son would probably pick it up pretty quick. And so what I might do, if portability is really important to you, is keep the Accent, keep the Unity 84. We don't want to just throw that away and switch cold turkey, but maybe if you're interested in getting Lamp Words for Life on the iPad or even an iPad mini, Lamp can't go on an iPhone. It can't go smaller than an iPad. So if you wanted the mini, that would probably be the smallest, most portable, and just start playing with it. It has so many similarities. There are some differences, but he might be able to easily learn. And then you would just have both available.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that was an option. That would be awesome.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. I didn't know they were that similar. I've heard of the lamp words for life.
Yep. There, like I said, there's some differences, but that would be like the most similar. It's like the same symbols, the same way that the language is organized. You know, the little red apple means eat, and it means it has hungry. It has all, yeah. So it's the same layout.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and I think that wraps up our questions in the chat, but just want to see if anybody else has a hand up or anything. If not, we'll move on to part 3.
All right, let's do it. Okay, my screen is still shared, right? Yes, okay. Okay, so I will try to move through this. Yes, so now we're really moving into what can we do to really help our AAC users with whatever their AAC system is. And so we're going to go over some AAC best practices, and this is according to AAC specialists, but also I've been learning over the past few months and just getting input from AAC users themselves. So we'll kind of hear some different perspectives as we work through some of these best practices. So first and foremost, the AAC system must be accessible. The child's AAC system, no matter what it is their voice, and it cannot be taken away from them. Taking a child's AAC system away is like covering a speaking child's mouth. But I do recognize that there are situations when having an AAC system right on the child might not be totally feasible, like what we talked about at the pool, at the beach, bath time, or even on the playground when if your child's like, I need to just run around and climb and this thing is getting in my way. In those cases, we can just make sure that the device is somewhere in the vicinity, and maybe the child has a way to indicate that they need their device, or that, you know, they need you to go get it. And that's where multimodal communication is so key. Maybe they have a certain sign or a gesture or a specific vocalization that they use that, you know, will mean I need my device, I need my talker. This will be one of the resources that you get. It's a handout that I made that just kind of outlines different tasks that can be assigned to different team members. This is mainly kind of for school, but just to make sure that everybody on the team that has a role to play in making sure that that device, that AAC system, is near the child and that they have a way to get it. Okay, another best practice is providing what we call aided language stimulation. You might also hear the term aided language input. You also hear people say modeling. Okay, so aided language stimulation is a strategy to teach children symbol meaning during meaningful and authentic interactions. This is where us, the adults, the communication partners, are selecting symbols on the child's system to create a message to talk to them. And we might also use spoken language or speech when we are activating buttons on the device or book. So in this little example here, this adult is pushing go and play, but she's verbally saying, let's go play. And so what's interesting is that there are actually two different viewpoints on how to use aided language stimulation. And I'm going to go into those really quick, but we really just have to figure out what works best for your unique child. Everyone is different. So this is like the most common viewpoint of it, is that, like in this example, you don't need to hit every single button that you want to say verbally with your mouth. So yeah, so just like this example, but some autistic adults have said that it has been really helpful when these communication partners actually do model each word that they are saying, so that it's like they're getting access to the full sentence. So just keep that in mind, that It might be different for each person. Okay, so I really want this to sink in with everybody. So when we talk about aided language stimulation or aided language input or modeling, whatever we're going to call it, this has to be done without expecting the child to either imitate what you've just said or respond to what you've just said. We just have to do it and be done there. So it really comes down to your mindset. What are you thinking in this moment? And I've really had to check myself on these mindsets. So let's say I am modeling to my client and I say, let's go play. In my mind, am I thinking, oh, I really want them to tell me play on their talker now. I really hope that they're going to push play just like I did. So is that what my mindset is? Am I expecting them to imitate me or respond? Where if that is kind of my thought process, I need to try really hard to move over here to, I'm just using the child's talker to communicate and connect with them. And that's it. When children are smart and when they feel like you are putting a demand on them, it no longer is about the authentic interaction. It is about, this is work. And they're really smart about figuring that out. Okay. So why is aided language stimulation so important? Why is it so important that we, as the communication partners, use the child's device to interact with them? So this is a quote by Jane Corsten. She's a speech language pathologist, and she said that by 18 months, babies have heard 4,380 hours of spoken language, yet we're not expecting them to be fluent speakers. So if an AAC learner only sees symbols modeled twice a week for 20 to 30 minutes, which is like a speech therapy session, it would take them 84 years to have the same exposure to their language, which is the AAC system, as that 18-month-old had to spoken language. So this is kind of hard to hear, but we need to model messages on the AAC system way more frequently than we think. So I've heard a number like about 200 messages per day. It's a lot, but it's kind of what it would take. I love this visual to show the importance of aided language stimulation, and we are going to start by looking at this middle scenario. Okay, so because this is most often what is happening with our AAC users. So we right here have input. This is what they are hearing. They're hearing spoken language. They're hearing speech all around them. Yet we expect them to use their AAC system to communicate with us. And remember, it's like learning another language. The symbols are abstract. They have to learn the location of all the messages. So this is really like if we wanted a child to start speaking Chinese, but we just continued to talk to them in English. That just doesn't work. So you have a very confused child. Then if you move up to the top, this is what our speaking neurotypical people experience, where they're hearing speech and they are using speech. So the input is equal to the output and they're happy campers. Down here is the ideal. This is what we really want to aim for, where our AAC user is getting aided language input, right? In addition to hearing spoken language, because a lot of times we're going to pair our models with our speech. So they're getting that, and that's what they're using to express themselves. So it's input equals output, and we are happy. Okay. Okay, another thing to consider is we want to move beyond requesting. So a lot of times, teachers, therapists, parents, we start with teaching a child how to request using their AAC system. We want them to request what food they want, what toy they want, what game they want, whatever it is, because it tends to get immediate buy-in, right? The child's getting something that they really like. And it's also easy to determine a correct response, but if we just get stuck here, it's pretty dangerous, because requesting is extremely limiting in terms of social interaction. You really don't hear peers going up to each other and saying, I want a cookie. So they're doing a lot more than just requesting. And the other thing to keep in mind is communication reasons, like the different reasons we communicate for, are not hierarchical. There's no reason to start with requesting and master that before you move on to other things like commenting or telling stories or telling jokes, things like that. All of these things should be happening simultaneously and naturally. And so just kind of thinking about, well, why else do we communicate besides requesting? There's so many reasons. We greet people, we tell stories, we explain how to do things, we share our feelings, our ideas, our opinions, we ask questions, we complain, we tell jokes, we give and ask for clarification, we tell others what to do, we protest and self-advocate. So all of these things we should be modeling and focusing on, not just honing in on requesting. We want to support motor planning. So motor planning is what happens when we learn a new motor task. So you can kind of think back to when you were learning to type on the keyboard. So in the beginning, you had to visually scan for your intended letters, and it probably took a long time just to spell one word. But now you're quickly typing. You might not even have to look at the keyboard. But imagine what would happen if your keyboard just randomly rearranged all the letters. That would really throw you off, because you learned through motor planning and then had in motor memory where everything was, and you would do it automatically. So let's think about how this translates to AAC. So whenever a child has an AAC system, they have to learn the motor plan for every button or message cell on their AAC system. So at first, they don't know where anything is. So they're looking, they're visually scanning. They might be activating a lot of buttons just to hear what it says. And then they find their desired message, right? And after they find their desired message over and over, they start to just remember its location, and they don't have to exert so much energy into locating it anymore. So now it's stored in motor memory. It's efficient. So this is so important. We want to select the largest grid size possible. And by grid size, I mean how many buttons are on a page. We want to go as many buttons as possible within that person's visual and motor capabilities. And I'm going to show you why in a second. We're going to go through a simulation of that. But this is a common question that comes up when I say things like that, like we need to go with a big grid size. I hear, well, what if the large grid size is too overwhelming for my child? Shouldn't we start with the small grid size, bigger buttons, fewer buttons, and then work our way up over time? So if we do this, then every time we change the page set or the grid size, the child is going to have to learn new motor plans. So it would be like if somebody rearranged your key guard every time, your keyboard. So this is why kind of making the best guess right from the get-go about how high up in grid size can we go is really ideal. So here's a scenario of that. So this language system is called word power, and we are going to focus on finding the word eat as I scan through these next few slides. So right here, we have a 25 by 25 grid size. I'm sorry, 5 by 5 grid size, so 25 buttons on a page. And this might make a lot of adults feel comfortable, like, yeah, my kid, this looks good. They can handle this. Okay, so we get them this grid size, and wow, before long, like within 6 months, they're ready to move up. They've mastered this. They need more words. So then, okay, so now we're going to go up to a next grid size, and I want you to find the word eat. Okay, so you probably first were kind of looking right here because that's where it was, and then, oh, here it is down here. So it's moved a little because it had to accommodate for more buttons being added. Okay, so now our savvy little guy is already mastered this. He needs more words. So we bump him up again. Where is eat? Your eye probably jumped down here, but now it's not there. So you have to visually scan. Where is this? Here it is, eat. It had to move to accommodate more buttons. So now that child's having to learn new motor plan. And we'll go one more time just for fun. You probably started looking up here, but here it is right there. So instead of progressing in grid size, what we can do is use a consistent grid size, pick the largest possible, and then progress in the number of messages that are visible. So here's pro loco to go. And you can see this is a large grid size. I'm not exactly sure how many, but there's a lot of buttons that could be on this page, but a lot of them are hidden or what we call masked. Okay, so now we're going to find the word go. Okay, so here it is right there. And now we're like, okay, let's make more buttons visible. Here they are. Go is in the same spot. Cool. We didn't have to learn a new motor plan for go. We just have to learn where some of the new words are. Okay, let's unmask more words. There it is. Go is still in the same spot. But, so that strategy is called masking. It's where you hide buttons. This is something that we must do with caution. So there's kind of a right way to do this and a wrong way to do this. We'll start with the wrong way. The wrong way would be if you kept the child's AAC system masked like for a long period of time, over 6 months or something, you know, and you never, this was just hidden. All of this was hidden constantly over a long period of time. So they didn't have access to explore anything else except what's here. The better way to use masking is to mask during specific teaching opportunities or activities, and then open the device back up to its entire, you know, vocabulary for the child to explore. So in this example, you know, maybe we are targeting the word go, and I've masked things during ball play so that we can really work on, oh, there is that word go. But then as soon as we're done with ball play, I unlock it, and now the child has access to all the words that they can then play around with and explore. All right, shifting to another best practice is teaching core vocabulary. And I have fringe in parentheses. We'll talk about fringe in a second, but core vocabulary words are a relatively small set of high frequency words that can be used across a variety of contexts. They make up around 80% of what we say in everyday speech. So if someone was writing down, transcribing what I'm saying, a lot of what I'm saying is going to be comprised of core vocabulary words. It's mostly verbs, pronouns, descriptors like adjectives, adverbs, and prepositions. Not a lot of nouns. So core words really can be used to express a lot of different communicative functions, like those different reasons we communicate. You can see I've used core words in this example to create a sentence. Do you want to go? Versus a statement. You want to go. So those are all core vocabulary words, and we can easily combine them to create sentences. So core vocabulary has kind of been this buzzword lately. This is really important, and the pendulum swung to core vocabulary because people weren't teaching core vocabulary. But there's also been this sort of extreme where people have just focused on core vocabulary, almost to the extent where fringe is no longer important. And what fringe is more activity specific vocabulary. So these are going to be a lot of nouns. So if, you know, your child likes dinosaurs, it's going to be a lot of dinosaur names and maybe verbs related to dinosaurs. But really, we need both in a robust AAC system, because fringe is going to be a lot of those really motivating words. And so really, if your child just has access to like a core vocabulary board and that's it, that's not sufficient. That's not robust AAC. All right, the AAC system should allow for single word combinations and whole phrases. There is nothing wrong with having some buttons that have a whole sentence or a whole phrase. In fact, that's really, really great for that efficient communication during times of, emergency or quick social exchanges. We need sometimes a whole phrase like, hey, how's it going? Instead of having to go find the word, hey, how's it going? But single words are important too, because that really allows for self-generated language. And what we've kind of finding, it's been around, but it's really coming more to light more recently, is that there are really two ways that people process language. We have our analytic language processors. These are our word babies. They start by learning single words, then they combine those words, they make phrases and sentences. But there's this whole other way to process language called Gestalt language processing. And this is where you might hear a child using echolalia or, scripts, and they're starting with these long, really rich intonation phrases. And those then need to kind of be broken down into little chunks and then single words, and then the words can be recombined. And so by having access to both single words and whole phrases in an AAC system, you're supporting all types of language processors. And here's an example of what that might look like. This is Tobii Dynavox. This is their new Motor Plan 30 page set. And you can see and within the app on this page, there's a bunch of single words. And then within a separate folder, they have a bunch of their kind of quick phrases that you can say really quickly. Okay, least to most prompt hierarchy. We know that children need support when learning new things. However, we don't want to give so much support that we aren't giving them a chance to experiment and problem solve on their own. We need to let kids struggle sometimes and build some resiliency. When working with AAC users, us adults tend to jump in right away with way too much support. And like I said previously, this can lead to prompt dependency. And worst case, the child experiences AAC trauma, and they start to begin to believe that their communication partner doesn't care what they want to say. They just view that communication partner, that adult, as, well, I better just let them prompt me so they can tell me what they want me to say. And that's really the worst case scenario. Okay, so if we find ourselves relying so heavily on prompting, we need to look at ourselves and think, maybe we need to do some more fun and engaging activities. So I love this quote from Rachel Madel. She's also an AAC specialist, and she says, inspire, don't require. Inspire that child, have so much fun that they want to communicate with you, versus sitting down and drilling and making it a requirement or a demand. So this is a prompt hierarchy that that is out there, and I've made it into my own little handout, and this is what I used to share with families and teams. But if you look close, you'll see from yellow through red, I have all of these: should be used as a last resort, use with caution, try to avoid. So it was like half of my prompt hierarchy. I had it on here, but I was like, we shouldn't really use that ever. So since so many of these invasive prompting is just not great, I found a new prompt hierarchy, and this is from Kate McLaughlin. She is another AAC specialist. This is her link to her website. She's the AAC coach on Instagram. It's a great account to follow. And this is kind of her level of support, and I love it. So first, you just give wait time, and it says here 10 to 15 seconds. Wait time is very individualized. Some individuals need a lot more wait time than that, but you start with wait. Then you might make a suggestion to use the AAC system, like maybe your talker will help. It's not go tell me with your talker. It's just maybe it would help. I don't know, but maybe it will. You could point to the AAC system and make another suggestion. You can use your talker to help if you want. And then maybe helping them to co-construct a message, like suggesting a possible message. Maybe you're thinking we should do something else, and maybe pointing to a few of the folders that they might possibly want to navigate into. So you can see it's just very different than an invasive tell me go, or kind of a gesture pointing to say go, it's right here, touch go, or even like a hand over hand, here, let me physically help you, touch go. We don't want to get that invasive because it takes away communication autonomy. Attribute meaning. So this is just when our children are exploring their device, we might find that what they are communicating doesn't seem super contextual to what's happening. And that's okay, because they're still learning, right? And so in those type of moments, you just want to respond naturally and give a natural feedback, because then you're teaching that child cause effect. You're teaching them that what they said, whatever they said, here's how you might actually respond to that, versus correcting them and saying something like, well, that's not what we're talking about here, touch this, because then you've totally just, disrespected their autonomy. But here's kind of an example. Like, let's say you're playing with an ABC puzzle and you model and say, I see the letter B, and then they select dinosaur. So you're kind of like, okay, oh, D is for dinosaur. So you're kind of trying, you might have to stretch a little bit, but you are trying to respond to whatever they say. So then maybe they select what, and then you're like, okay, how can I do this one? What letter is next? So you can see how you're kind of just trying to respond to whatever they are activating. Wait time. I just want to point out here that using AAC methods and tools can be 10 times slower than spoken language. When I'm talking really fast because I'm trying to get all this information in, but speech is produced at approximately 135 words per minute. Mine is probably double that right now. But for an AAC user, it can be closer to 10 words per minute. So we need to get comfortable sitting in silence and not prompt and jump in too quickly, because we want to let the AAC user have a chance to initiate. Last one. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but don't require the child to express the same message more than once. And I already gave this example about the sign more. If you truly know what your child communicated to you, do not then ask them to say it with their talker or sign it or point to a picture symbol of it. Instead, a better option might be, oh, I saw you say more. Okay, we can go get some more. And then you might model more cookies, but you're modeling without expectation. Okay, and then this is more just for your reference and resources. There'll be a few handouts. You can look these over and share them with your team. It's just, some do's and don'ts of AAC. At the end of the presentation, there's some of my favorite websites and podcasts. I love listening to podcasts. And then I also really like Instagram accounts because I like digesting information in short little snippets. So some of these accounts are also AAC users themselves, like Just Keep Stimming and Rachel Dorsey, Nigh Functioning Autism Disability Reframed. So I think it's good to follow, some of those individuals themselves and hear it from them. Thank you so much. So I think I left a little bit of time in case there are more questions. So I'm going to stop sharing.
This has been amazing. I know we're all on information overload.
I know.
Just to repeat, I will send all the resources that Caitlin has shared out, as well as the video of this, which will also go up on the KARES website. So we'll have plenty of time to reconnect if there are questions that we don't get to, but I will try to read out the few that I'm seeing in the chat. So
okay.
Of course, there's some questions about grid size. And I just want to say, as a parent of a kid with AAC who did it all wrong from the very beginning, if you're listening to this and feeling like you made mistakes along the way, you are not alone. And I think that it's just a symptom of kind of the lack of support that a lot of us have had in our systems and in our communities in getting this set up the right way. We've had to just do whatever we could do to get access. And so the question is about, well, Ron's son, Josh, he's almost 18. How do you know when you should increase grid size if you maybe went with a smaller grid size to begin with?
Gosh, that's a good question. I mean, I would want to know if that individual was using the device really, really fluently, and maybe if he was getting frustrated during moments where it seems like he might be trying to find something on the device that's not there, and so he's now having to communicate using other, more universal communication behaviors. Like maybe that would be a sign that he needs more vocabulary.
Okay. Let's see what else. Okay, this question came from me. So I know you talked about these kind of best practices, and this is the way that we do things in the field now and stuff like that. And then I was thinking about, many of our kids were evaluated 4, 5, 6, lots of years ago when these weren't necessarily the best practices. I'm curious how quickly you and maybe even some of the students on the call are seeing like this kind of change toward neurodiversity affirming practices in the field, and if there's any gentle way to encourage the therapists that we interact with that might be using invasive prompt practices to possibly consider some of these other resources.
Yeah, I think that for sure the younger generation SLPs coming through have heard more about this than someone like me. I mean, I first heard about it from one of my grad students, which is why I love taking grad students. But I think a lot of therapists that are on social media hear about it because there's a lot of information now just circulating quicker, which is a really good thing. But of course, there's going to be therapists that aren't just, I honestly don't think it's that. I think it's that, they don't know. They don't have access to the information. And so as a parent, I would you have to be your child's biggest advocate, and you have to stand up for your child and share this information. And yeah, it might be uncomfortable for that SLP or other therapist to hear this because it can make them feel defensive. Nobody wants to feel like what you're questioning what I'm doing, but ultimately it is in the best interest of your child. And so maybe just asking them like, oh, have you heard of the neurodiversity affirming movement? I just did this training, and just kind of sharing information that way and just gauging how they respond to it.
That's great advice. I think particularly they see our children becoming dysregulated quickly in the times when they're not using these practices. And so that's a big sign for parents to watch out for too.
Yep.
And then there was one sort of question that may be for the full group, which is that, did everyone here using AAC start kind of this process through getting access to speech therapy services? I guess, what did people's journeys look like? And I think there was some conversation.
This is a question for like the group, or yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a parent of a younger kiddo that doesn't have access to AAC yet. And you guys that have little kids that are here, I'm amazed and so excited for you that you're getting this information like so early on.
Yes. Yeah. Like no one is too anything. No one's too young. I love doing early intervention and working with those that are even under 2. And in terms of like getting set up, of course you can connect with a speech therapist, but now with all of the iPad apps, it could be, maybe I'll send you a list of some of the robust systems, Melissa, so like people can just at least research what's out there, because a lot of the AAC apps have free trials or even just like a monthly subscription. So you could pay like $10 to try one for a month. And then if you don't like it, you could cancel the subscription. So yeah, I mean, the main thing is that it's a robust system. And yes, there are ways to figure out which app might be a better fit, and that would require an SLP.
Great advice. All right, I think we are almost to time. I don't see any more questions in the chat, but if anyone wants to raise a hand and ask one last question before we go, Laura?
I just wanted to make a comment. I don't know if you guys can see these feelings cards. Have you heard of these, Caitlin?
No.
So they've been so helpful for my daughter. She's 17 and she is speaking, has a really hard time explaining like what she's feeling. And even if she's not feeling well, or if she's sad or frustrated, and they go through and they have like, I don't know if you can see them, but they'll go through, they have different faces and different expressions. And then they also have little scenarios that says, how would you feel if? And I just wanted to suggest that for families, if your child is having a hard time explaining how they're feeling, if they're not feeling well, or if they're emotional, or if their feelings have been hurt, that they're a really good tool to have.
That's really awesome. And I want to add another sort of avenue to that too. So a lot of our kiddos, when they have trouble understanding feelings, a lot of times they have trouble with what's called interoception, which is like even understanding some of the signals that are happening in your body, like knowing, oh, wait, my stomach is growling and my muscles feel tired. That means I'm probably hungry and I need to eat. And that definitely falls within the realm of occupational therapy. So that's also a really good area to build skills in, is understanding your body's signals.
Great, thank you for sharing that. And thank you everyone for attending today. This is part of a series that we're doing in 2023. So be on the lookout for lots more sessions coming up. Our next session is going to be that RareX launch party that I talked about on February 25th. So make sure you have joined that event on Facebook. We have sessions on behavior, school planning, IEPs, toilet training, guardianship, caregiver burnout, and mental health coming up in 2023. And then of course, I got everyone's submissions, so we'll let you know by the end of the week who is the winner of the door prize. And we'll contact you via the email and phone that you gave in the form there. And then if I could just ask everyone, when I end the meeting, there's going to be a little survey that pops up, which is 2 quick questions. If you could give us some feedback on if you liked the session and found it useful, so that we can hopefully get more opportunities like this funded for our families in the future. And thank you, Caitlin. Really appreciate your work.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
See everyone soon. Bye, guys.
Thank you.